The auction room went silent when old Silas Rourke raised his trembling hand and bid $7,000 for the broken-down mill at the edge of town. Then the laughter came, sharp and cruel, rolling across the room like thunder. The bank officers smirked. The developers leaned back in their chairs, and someone whispered that Silas must have lost his mind. But none of them knew that the tired man in the faded work coat was holding more than a bid card. He was holding the last promise he had ever made to his wife. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet strength of people the world underestimates, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Time Pryadko. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the smallest hand in the room carries the biggest truth. Silas Rourke had spent 43 years repairing roofs, fixing porch steps, and hauling lumber through the small town of Bellwether Creek. He was not rich, not polished, and not the kind of man people noticed unless their furnace stopped working in January. His hands were bent from labor, his back had a permanent curve, and his old pickup coughed smoke every morning before it agreed to start. But inside him lived a devotion that had survived every hardship. His late wife, Junia, had loved the old mill because her father had worked there, because town weddings were once held in its yard, and because every spring, wildflowers grew beside the cracked stone wall as if the place still remembered joy. Before she died, she made Silas promise that if the mill ever went up for sale, he would try to save it from becoming another glass building with locked doors and security guards. For years, Silas kept that promise folded inside him like a fragile letter. Then the bank foreclosed on the property and announced a county auction. Everyone knew what would happen. Meridian Crown Bank had already been working quietly with a development company called Halden Ridge Partners. They planned to buy the mill and the surrounding acres, demolish everything, and build a $30 million luxury riverside complex with private offices, high-end stores, and underground parking. The town council called it progress. The bank called it economic renewal. But people like Silas knew the project would push out the mechanic shop, the diner, the thrift store, and half the families living near the river. Still, nobody had the money to fight it. Nobody, except Silas, had even shown up with hope in his pocket. His $7,000 had come from selling Junia's wedding bracelet, his old lathe, and the last 2 acres of wooded land behind his house. When he walked into that auction room, he knew he looked poor. His coat was patched at the elbows, his boots were muddy, and his face carried the tired dignity of a man who had buried too much. Across the room sat Vice President Cormac Vell, the bank's golden man, wearing a burgundy suit and a smile that never reached his eyes. Beside him were engineers, lawyers, and investors who looked at Silas the way people look at a stain on a clean floor. When the auctioneer opened the bidding and Silas raised his card, Cormac laughed first. Others followed. It was not just amusement. It was a public reminder that some people were expected to stay small. The bank outbid Silas within seconds, and the room applauded when Halden Ridge secured the property. Silas sat still, his bid card lowered in his lap, feeling the humiliation burn behind his eyes. For a moment, he almost believed them. He almost believed that a man with $7,000 had no right to stand against $30 million. But as the auction cleared and Cormac passed by, leaving behind the scent of expensive cologne and victory, Silas noticed something on the table. A folder had slipped from the bank's paperwork stack. He picked it up, intending to return it, but his eyes caught the name of the old mill and a survey map marked in red. Under the map were copies of environmental approvals, riverbank stability reports, and a demolition timeline. One page had a signature dated 3 months before the public hearing had even been announced. Silas did not understand legal language, but he understood dishonesty. That night he sat at Junia's kitchen table beneath the yellow lamp and read every page slowly with a magnifying glass. The documents suggested the bank and developers had known about underground fuel contamination, a buried drainage tunnel under the mill, and a protected wetland fed by the creek. Worse, the approvals looked rushed, possibly filed before the required public notice. Silas's hands shook, not from age this time, but from the terrible weight of knowing that powerful people had counted on ordinary people being too tired, too poor, or too ashamed to look closely. The next morning, Silas walked to the library and asked the young librarian, Pryadko, to help him search county records. Priya had known Junia from the reading circle and remembered how she brought lemon bread to every meeting. She helped Silas print old maps, zoning notices, and environmental filings. Page by page, a hidden story emerged. The old mill sat on a forgotten public easement created in 1912, guaranteeing community access to the river path. A buried culvert carried spring water into a protected wetland. Any major construction required a full environmental review and public challenge period. Meridian Crown Bank had tried to bury that fact under paperwork, hoping no one would connect old records with new plans. Silas did not go to the newspapers first. He went door to door. He visited the diner at dawn, the laundromat at noon, and the trailer park at dusk. Some people were afraid to sign anything. Some had bank loans. Some worried they would lose jobs promised by the developers. Silas listened without anger. He told them he was not against work, not against growth, not against anyone wanting a better life. He was against being erased. Slowly, the town began to stir. A retired surveyor named Orrin Pike checked the maps. A schoolteacher named Veda Mar found photographs proving the river path had been used by the public for generations. Priya helped scan the documents. By the end of the week, Silas had a petition, a legal complaint, and more neighbors standing beside him than he had ever expected. The real turning point came at the emergency county hearing. Cormac Vell arrived confident, surrounded by lawyers who carried polished briefcases and spoke in smooth paragraphs. Silas arrived with a cardboard box full of records and a grief that had turned into courage. He wore the same patched coat from the auction. The room filled with residents who had once felt invisible. When the county clerk called the case, the bank's lawyers argued that the project was too important to delay. They spoke of jobs, tax revenue, and modernization. Then Silas placed Junia's old photograph on the table, not as evidence, but as strength, and Priya presented the documents showing irregular dates, missing notices, and the public easement. Orrin confirmed the drainage tunnel. Veda showed decades of community access. One by one, the bank's certainty began to crack. The judge ordered an immediate halt to demolition pending a full investigation. The $30 million project froze before a single wall came down. Reporters arrived by afternoon. By nightfall, Meridian Crown Bank was facing public scrutiny. Halden Ridge had suspended its contract, and Cormac Vell had disappeared behind a statement about internal review. Silas did not celebrate the way people expected. He went alone to the mill at sunset, stood by the stone wall, and touched the place where wildflowers grew through the weeds. The wind moved softly through the broken windows, and for the first time since Junia's funeral, he felt like she might have been near enough to hear him say that he had tried. Months later, the town formed a non-profit trust and raised enough grants to restore the mill as a community market, workshop, and riverside hall. Silas's $7,000 bid never bought the building, but it bought attention. It bought the first question. It bought the courage for others to ask why they had been told they were powerless. On opening day, children ran along the river path. Old workers touched the restored beams, and Silas sat quietly on a bench named for Junia, watching sunlight spill across the floor, where laughter finally belonged again. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs hope, subscribe to Time Pryadko, and leave a comment so more people can find stories about courage, kindness, and second chances. Before the ending, comment this line: A small voice can stop a giant lie. Silas Rourke never became rich, and he never cared to be famous. But whenever someone asked how a poor old man stopped a $30 million project, he would look toward the mill, smile softly, and say that money can build walls. But love remembers where the doors are.